Today on Sekulow, a big announcement for the American Center for Law and Justice. So we have a big announcement for you today. It's going to be happening on set too. So if you are watching the broadcast, this is not just an announcement by word. It's not just someone that's going to be joining us by Skype. This is going to be happening in the studio. It's a brand new team member at the American Center for Law and Justice. Now, we've got great staff and a great team at the ACLJ, but everybody doesn't get their own broadcast. But there are certain members of the team, when they join, they do get their own broadcast for the American Center for Law and Justice, and we're going to, of course, talk about a lot of issues with them. But, Dad, just to let people know, what is this big announcement of this new member of the ACLJ team?
Well, I'm really honored to report to our ACLJ listeners and members and folks that are listening on all of our social media platforms or watching that we are happy to announce that the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is now a Senior Counsel for Global Affairs at the American Center for Law and Justice. Now, you're going to see him in a few moments on our broadcast. You're going to be seeing a lot of them over the years ahead, and you'll be reading a lot that he produces on issues involving foreign policy. As you know, we have offices globally, having the addition of recently Rick Grinnell, and now, of course, who was the Director of National Intelligence and Ambassador to Germany, now having the former Secretary of State as part of the ACLJ team, and has been a friend of ours for a long time, is a real honor. This is a big moment for us historically.
And he's bringing to it the intel like Rick Grinnell does, so like as the director of the CIA. So we've got that intelligence side that we're really beefing up in the ACLJ. I mean, to really increase our capacity there to bring you the best info on our broadcast, but then also working as a member of the team. So you're going to see, the broadcast side of it mostly, but there's going to be written public work, but also behind the scenes work that you won't ever see that is conducted by Secretary of State Pompeo, by Rick, and who by others who are as they join the team. I just want to say this to all of you. We're able to put this team together right away to be able to combat everything that's going to go on with the Biden administration because of your tremendous support for the ACLJ. Even after this new administration came in, your support has not wavered, and it's allowed us to be creative. It's allowed us to think about, if we could add someone to our team right now that would be great for our supporters that would love it, and that would be substantively great. Who could we add? So we added Rick. He had already left the administration. He was available, and his insight was great throughout the election process, and now and continues to be. And then we thought, okay, let's think next steps. Who is now finishing out? And so Mike Pompeo was right at the top of the list,
very top,
literally. And we reached out. This is someone who we've had on our broadcast since he was a member of Congress. And again, now he will be in the studio with us. So if you're watching this broadcast, you don't want to miss that. This is not going to be joining us by phone, not by Skype this time. Now, in the future, it might be more like that, obviously. We won't always all be in the same place. But I also want to let our radio listeners know, because that is the predominant amount of our listeners are on terrestrial radio and Sirius XM. This is a show you probably want to go and check out on Facebook, because you get to see Secretary of State Pompeo with us on set.
I'll tell you, we have worked with Secretary Pompeo when he was a freshman congressman. You're actually going to hear later in the broadcast an interview we did with him back in 2011 or 2012. And I will tell you this, it's such an honor to see his career, just tremendous influence he's had, both as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency and then as the Secretary of State. And to have him now as an ACLJ Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, I just can't think of anything better to move our issues forward. Substantively will make a big difference.
Joining us now to talk about foreign policy now and in the future, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo.
This is a different day and age, a different United States of America foreign policy.
Well, Mike Pompeo said the policies of the previous administration really brought havoc to the region.
Joining me right now with his reaction and the state of affairs right now between the U.S. and China is U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
China's entry into Iran will destabilize the Middle East. It'll put Israel at risk. What we've attempted to do is make clear to China, if you want to participate on the world stage, you can't engage in behavior like this.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is urging Turkey to release detained American pastor Andrew Brunson.
This morning, Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was in prison in Turkey for nearly 2 years, has been let out of jail.
The ACLJ was at the very center of making the world aware of the plight of Pastor Brunson. They raised awareness of this, and then the administration took this very seriously. In my time in service, both as CIA director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
This is a moment in the history of the American Center for Law and Justice. Secretary Pompeo has had an incredible career already, serving in Congress, was the director of the CIA, and of course, most recently, the Secretary of State for the United States of America.
The work that we do with this current administration will save lives and protect America and keep us free and safe and strong.
Well, I'm very happy to announce that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is now a senior counsel for global affairs for the American Center for Law and Justice.
The ACLJ today is needed now more than ever, and it's why I am so thrilled to be a part of this really important organization.
Hey, welcome back to Sekulow. As we told you in the first segment of the broadcast, we have a very special announcement. We announced who that is, a former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. He is joining us in studio today on Sekulow. He's with us and with the team. It is great to have Secretary Pompeo. He is going to serve as the ACLJ's Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my goodness. It's great to be with you. It's great to be with you today, and it's great to be part of the team as well.
Well, listen, we're thrilled to have you, and I want to start to get right into this because I think it's important for our audience. Obviously, with your most recent experience, I mean, you served as CIA director also, of course, and I remember you as a congressman. But as Secretary of State, I want to get into kind of globally how you, obviously there's a shift in policy now. We know that shift's going to be real. We know that there's going to be implications. How do you see if you're looking at a world map right now, what do you see?
So the biggest challenge that our kids and our grandkids are going to change undoubtedly comes from the Chinese Communist Party. It is a atheist, Marxist-Leninist, communist organization. We know, right? We know how these work, right? We know what it means for people of faith. We know what it means to ordinary people who just want to live their lives. And then we now know what it is their intentions are for the world, the threat that it poses to the United States of America. We can never forget the challenges from counterterrorism. It's now 20 years on from 9/11. Yep. But make no mistake about it, the Middle East is still a place where you have an Iranian regime, a theocratic, kleptocratic regime and leaders. And they, too, view the United States as the great Satan and haven't given up on the fact that they may be able to roll this administration.
I want to go back to the situation with China for a moment and talk about that because it's not just, we look at, when we're dealing with legal issues, sometimes I'll call on the international stage especially, I'll say we're engaged in lawfare. You got these regimes utilizing the usually international tribunals to get their way. And it's a form of warfare, but it's without bullets. It's in the legal process. The Chinese, the threat to me, as looking at it, is you've got both an economic threat and then the political threat. And then there's kind of the global aspect of that is their desire, and they've been always very clear about this, is they want control.
Yeah. No, we should never forget. So the economic piece of this has an enormous national security implication because it turns on the most capable high-end technologies that the world knows, whether it's artificial intelligence or machine learning. And we've made this enormous mistake. We've allowed them to come steal it from us. And we've invited them into our universities. We've invited them into our research institutions. We've provided U.S. taxpayer money to underwrite this research, and we've allowed them to be in places we should have never let them be in. They've used it to their advantage. And to your point about the legal system, they've pretended to comply with these legal things around the world and claim that they're a nation that wants to be part of a normal civilized world, while all the while benefiting from an unequal set of rules. And the good thing about our administration is we didn't let that happen. Every place we confronted them, every place we encountered them, we demanded that they be fair and reciprocal and they behave in a way that normal nations behave.
Yeah, I think staying on China is good right now, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this is obviously everybody is focused on China. I mean, still with COVID, we see that the Biden administration rushed to join the World Health Organization. We had the one American on the panel said we should just blindly accept their finding. But the American intelligence, even under the Biden administration, who joined the WHO, has said what they put out in April is still the statement from the U.S. government, even from Trump to Biden, and that is that they are still assessing and figuring out whether or not this was something that was done at that Wuhan Institute, which, by the way, we all learned receives U.S. funding and is still the Biden administration has not canceled that funding that they could be getting, and you can make a case for why maybe in the past. But now in the future, it's tough to make that case. But I mean, those threats too, people still wonder how much, because they destroy all the evidence. They make themselves look guilty, and even whether they are or not.
Right.
When you destroy all the evidence and then let the inspectors go in, it's pretty tough to come out. And our intelligence community will not go by what the WHO said.
So there's three things we know for sure about this virus with respect to China. First, that's where it began. It is, in fact, the Wuhan virus. This is indisputable, in spite of enormous propaganda where the Chinese have tried to foist it on America, saying that it came from frozen foods or from America's laboratories. This is just nonsense and propaganda. Second thing we know, immediately, the Chinese Communist Party knew an awful lot and refused to share that information with the world. Right? Your responsibility as a global player says if you've got a problem, you make sure and keep everyone safe. They didn't. They closed down travel inside of China, but allowed people to travel to Milan and all across the world, spreading this virus. And they knew better. They knew that human-to-human transmission was taking place. Finally, we know they operated this lab, and we know that they were engaged in research on these kinds of viruses. And we know that they've had trouble securing viruses in their labs before. In 2003, we know they leaked with respect to SARS. So they are not world-class when it comes to securing viruses in their laboratories. Now, there's a handful more pieces of evidence, too. I wish that the Chinese Communist Party was capable of sharing this information in the world, but you all know this, right? Just like with Chernobyl, just like with communist regimes all along, they close down, they disappear people who have the information that could help the world solve this serious problem.
You know, one of the things I said about the Chinese in relation to the virus was whether it was intentional or not, the actions they took afterwards failed, as you said, to live up to international obligations. And yet they almost get away with it with impunity. I mean, not when you all weren't there, but now it just seems like it's go along, get along. I know there's still policies out there. But going back just to the kind of the bravado that China uses in their language, both in the language that they're using and in the challenges. For our audience around the country, how would you, if you were on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest threat, where are they?
You know, I'd put it at a 9 or a 10. Okay. It is something that we're, and importantly, something we're going to have to confront for a while. It needs to be a sustained effort. We need to educate people. You know, I'll give you another example that everyone I think that's listening can understand. You'll see Chinese officials showing up at school board meetings all across America. You'll see them at PTA meetings. They're not coming there because they're good citizens of the community. They're coming there because they're attempting to educate you about what they want to do and how they want to undermine American democracy. This is a serious threat. Everyone needs to be aware of it. And we need to be mindful that they are serious about undermining our way of life here in the United States.
With some of the young kids, these Confucius institutes that we're hearing about that are all over the United States, they're trying to say, oh, this is just part of an education program. And people are seeing it. Like you said, it's in a lot of public schools across the country, wherever you are. It doesn't matter if you're on the coast or in middle America. And so they're in our schools. We're economically relying on them. And when something bad happens, we don't know if they intentionally did it, unintentionally did it, but they won't really get us the truth. I mean, that's a pretty tough diplomatic situation.
This is the conundrum. You add now that they conduct more missile tests than the rest of the world combined. They're enormous nuclear power, have a military that is expanding throughout the East China and South China Sea and wants to be able to control all the main waterways of the world. And you have a full throttle challenge to the way of life that we have here in the United States of America.
You know, the President Trump got a lot of flack for America First. A lot of flack. And, of course, I think it was a fantastic policy. But the Chinese have no hesitation, the communist regime, of saying China first.
Oh, goodness, no. Absolutely. In everything. And they're pretty audacious. They'll talk about China first, but they'll say, we want these deals to be win-win. This is their language. It's a win-win. I haven't seen a deal America cut for 50 years that was win-win.
and you're dealing with them because I know that they've got it's very obviously very centralized in the control factor. Was there a sense because when you were Secretary of State, President Trump was in office, and you had the whole apparatus of government following our policies, I felt like the Chinese, other than putting the virus aside, were pretty much being checkmated. I mean, that there was a serious check on the Chinese. They knew you all were tough for the country and putting our interests first. And what was the sense globally with our other partners with the Chinese? In other words, the other countries you had to deal with that are our allies.
Yeah.
Did they see it?
They did. They did in large part because we put it in front of them.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of my time. I'll never forget my first trip as Secretary of State where I traveled to Europe and was talking about the threat at this time from a particular technology from Huawei. they didn't want to believe it because it's hard. They were making money off of this. In the same way the United States was. They now have come to see it. What they need to know is that the Americans will be with them and that we'll have their back and we'll support them, whether that's the Australians, the Japanese, the Indians, the South Koreans. They know the challenge is before them. They need a strong America, America that understands America first, prepared to be their partner.
Do you think that the current administration, and I know it's very early, have you seen any sense of where that policy is going to be?
It's been a bit of a hodgepodge in terms of their statements. But in the end, Jay, it's not about their statements, it's about the actions. You have to be prepared to take serious actions to confront China in a serious way. There will be costs associated with that.
Yeah.
The Chinese will respond, but you have to be ready to walk through that fire and get it right.
You know, we didn't even get a chance to talk about the threat to religious minorities there, Christians
Sure.
and others. I mean, it's not just Christians, but that is also a real threat in China.
It is. My next to last day in office, I made a declaration which is unusual. I declared that there was genocide taking place. That was intentional. It was accurate. It was factually based. And it tells you the horrors that are taking place to religious minorities in that part of the country. It doesn't begin to address the ones that are happening all across China.
We come back. Secretary Pompeo continues to join us. If you're just joining us if you're listening, if you're watching, however you are taking in this broadcast, let me encourage you to share it with your friends and family. But also, I'll let you know this won't be the last time Secretary Pompeo joins us, but he has now joined the ACLJ as a Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. So you'll see him a couple times a week at least, maybe more when necessary on our broadcast. And then, of course, there'll be all the work he'll be doing behind the scenes with the ACLJ team, both domestically and internationally. Because I like to point out, too, his tenure as CA director. We will be right back on Sekulow. Hey, welcome back to Sekulow. I think this show just showed you, and having, of course, a former Secretary of State Pompeo, now a member of the ACLJ team as Senior Counsel.
We wore ties.
For Global Affairs. We wore ties for the former Secretary of State. You know, we don't usually do that, but again, he is just out of, that role and still very much in that debriefing portion of his phase too.
Yep.
And we remember when we added Rick Grinnell, he was just out of the role and still in that debriefing stage. But to have them on, to think about what we got through today, the insight we got, that you don't get on cable news. Think about what he will be providing to you as a listener. And then on top of that, think about what he's going to be providing for the ACLJ that you won't see and hear, that we can't just talk about on the air. But for you, the listener, just for you alone, I think worth it because it's going to give you insight in a longer format so you can actually get down to the issues you care about, not what the mainstream media is trying to tell you to care about that day, but what the issues are important. We talked about this rising new Islamic terror, even in North Africa. We barely just touched the surface of that today, but also got deeply into China, deeply into Iran, deeply into these UN agencies, Dad. I mean, this is, and Israel, of course. And this was just a day one introduction.
But what you're seeing, of course, on the broadcast, you get to see and get to share his insights. What Jordan was just alluding to is something I want to spend a couple minutes talking about. That is the substantive work of the American Center for Law and Justice. Our offices are literally around the globe. So as you know, we engage at the UN at the highest levels, and it's not easy. It's a hostile work environment, so to speak. It's usually hostile. But we've had great success also. But can you imagine now if you're in our position as the lawyers that run this, Jordan and I, and our team? I mean, Andy Economo, Harry Hutchison, Wes Smith, Skip Ash. I mean, people you see on this broadcast, they do this broadcast, but they're writing, they're drafting, they're negotiating all the time, doing legal work. But can you imagine now what's happened for us? That when we've got an issue that we're dealing with for Israel, let's say, and there's an issue with another country, that we can go to our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, who happens to be the former Secretary of State for the United States of America. Now, that is substantively for us, and that's what I want to share for a moment. Substantively for us, that's very important. Not the first member of the cabinet that we've had on our team, John Ashcroft, all the way back in 2005, and then who was a former Attorney General under George W. Bush, and was, of course, the Attorney General during 9/11. And then Rick Grinnell, former Acting Director of National Intelligence, Ambassador to Germany, and now, of course, the Secretary of State. But also understand, substantively, it gives us a lot of depth.
It does give us a lot of depth. So it's more than just what you're going to hear on the air. It's when we are dealing with opposing a Biden administration policy. it won't just be the ACLJ statement on it, Jay Sekulow and Jordan Sekulow statement, or our experts, which has done tremendous work in the past. But now we can add the names of the former Secretary of State, the last person to hold that position until the Biden administration, the former acting director of national intelligence and ambassador to Germany, a former attorney general. When these issues arise that are important, and I think with this specific appointment, I think we have increased our ability to talk about national security, but also intel.
Yeah,
intel, which this is a newer world for us because we lived it under Mueller.
Right.
What intel and how it can be misused.
Oh boy.
And so there is a difference between national security and intelligence. Intelligence goes with national security, but it's a big portion of it. And with adding now Mike Pompeo, who was the CIA director before he was Secretary of State, he was leading the CIA, and with Rick Grenell together, I mean, it's added a whole new area of practice really for the ACLJ.
Yeah.
We were living it as the president's private attorneys through Mueller and the intel
look
world.
at the first case that we filed this year.
Yes, it's about intel.
Right. So
it's
there it
Swalwell
is.
and China and the China influence. And if you listen to the broadcast today, you know it is. I don't like using words like Cold War again, and I don't. I think that we're. But the idea that the former Secretary of State said that they're at a 9 or a 10 threat level to the U.S. that China poses.
Yeah,
and it's a different kind of threat than maybe military, but it could be, a threat like, hey, we've had a pandemic for over a year that's brought our economy almost to its knees a couple of times. It's certainly a lot of people it has. We can't get these relief bills through, and it's still not. It's we're still trying to get vaccines out. We're still trying to get back to what is normal. We know they're responsible in some way for it, whether intentionally or unintentional. And then you have the economic fighting, the diplomatic fighting. So I think, it shifts to our thinking that it's not always about the Islamic State. So certainly they pose problems as well, especially Iran. But it's also it's broadening out your ability to understand these larger three-dimensional issues where we economically rely on China. We do everybody does business with China. Everybody look at what you bought, the store, and see where it was made.
Right.
But also the way that they want to be the world superpower. They don't want the U.S. to be the superpower.
That's what Secretary Pompeo was talking about. And, I'm corrected here because Rick Grenell served both as an ambassador and as a member of the cabinet. But Mike Pompeo was both the Secretary of State and the director of the CIA. So he held two cabinet positions in the President Trump's administration. So to underscore what Jordan's saying on a substance, you're going to benefit from the knowledge that he can share with us. And that's going to be significant. And we're excited about that. It's going to be a tremendous regular part of our panels at the ACLJ and our secular broadcast. However, there's another aspect of this, and that is the substantive work that is done every day, day in and day out, by the ACLJ. And to have as a resource Rick Grenell, same thing was true with John Ashcroft, Mike Pompeo, and others, but especially though Mike Pompeo and Rick Grenell, to have their knowledge on intelligence, which, like Jordan said, we became experts in intelligence because we handled the Mueller investigation. So there's not many lawyers that have been through a special counsel investigation on international intelligence gathering and have come out the other side of it. And we did. We were able to beat back Bob Mueller. But to have the information now and the expertise of Mike Pompeo and Rick and others, it's just tremendous.
And also their Rolodexes, their contacts, their ability to reach out if we need someone to reach out all around the world into known actors and actors who are more, shadowy behind the scenes in the intelligence world. We now have that resource at the ACLJ. Now, let me tell you, folks, it's all because of your support. Absolutely. There are a lot of groups came out of this pandemic. They wouldn't be able to bring people on like this. They're just trying to keep their heads above water.
Yeah.
You have been incredibly supportive of the ACLJ financially, and we wanted to do something with that. We didn't want to just say, let's sit on that. We wanted to say, let's expand the team in a way that is as substantive, that our supporters are not only going to like, but they're going to understand, wow, we're taking the ACLJ to another level. And we're
now more than ever.
And you are doing that with your financial support.
Yeah, and when we came up with a theme for 2021, that's what was Logan's idea to do this with our whole production team. Now ACLJ, now more than ever. More than ever means that we think that what we do is more important now than it was even last year or 4 years ago. Yeah, I want to tell you something. I'm underscoring what Jordan said. The support that you've given the ACLJ over this last year especially, with a pandemic, was breathtaking. Now, we know it was God. We have no doubt about that. But God uses people, and you all have been incredibly generous. And this year is off to a huge start as well. And what we thought was, how do we take those resources and best utilize them? And to best utilize them, we were able to retain for the ACLJ, for the broadcast, but also in our legal work, our new Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Because of your support of the ACLJ, that is possible and has actually happened.
Continue to support us at ACLJ.org. This is the first time, not the last time, you'll see Secretary Pompeo as part of the team. They're not guests of the broadcast. They are part of the ACLJ team now, and they are working members of the ACLJ team. I want you to understand that they are not just contributing to a broadcast, but behind the scenes as well. So support our work at ACLJ.org so we can continue to bring you the best team possible and the best info possible on Sekulow.